When it comes to value, the realtor, the appraiser, none of us, the bank, nobody determines exactly what that home is worth. The market is what dictates a home's actual value. And when you're selling a home off market, it's very difficult for you to tell what that value is because you haven't had a realistic opportunity to see how that home performs on the market. And so welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we'll be discussing the complexities of off-market sales. What exactly is an off-market sale? How does it work? What are some things that you need to keep in mind or be cautious of if you're considering this? All of those things we'll talk about and more. Off-market sales are definitely something that I have helped clients with in the past. It's also something that is special to me because that's how I purchased my own personal home as well. If you remember in the episode where I talked about my home buying journey, you'll remember that was how we came about the process of purchasing, was by doing an off-market sale. And so I definitely wanted to make sure that I took time to dedicate an episode to how this all works and some things that you need to keep in mind. There are some times where it works out great and everything goes as planned, and other times where it is just a complete nightmare of a transaction or a deal. And so I want to make sure that you have all of the appropriate information if you're considering going down this path. So first of all, let's talk about what an off-market sale actually is. So for example, anytime someone goes to put their house up for sale, one of the key things that they're considering or trying to do is make sure that they increase exposure on that home, right? Anytime I'm talking with a seller who's considering selling, there's three main goals that they're trying to achieve, or that they should be trying to achieve. One is that you want the highest price possible. You want the shortest amount of time possible for that particular transaction, and you want the least amount of hassle. And the goal is that you want to achieve all three of those. I don't want to do 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. I would like to have a deal, if I'm a seller, that has all three of those components. And in order to do that, the best way to do it is by giving your home the most amount of exposure possible. You want as many people as possible to know about that home and set up showings to come see the place in person. And then once they get there, again, you want to have as many people as possible have a good impression of that home, because that is going to always increase your likelihood of getting all three of those components for your house or for that transaction. In order to do that, one of the best ways that people have found is, of course, utilizing the internet. Most buyers are starting on the internet, and that's where you want to start. And so they will put their home up for sale on the market to as many people as possible, try to get it on as many different platforms and areas that they can to increase exposure, get the most amount of eyeballs on that home possible so that they can have their pick of the best buyer who's giving them all three of those terms that they're looking for. One of the ways that we have helped with this as realtors or as agents is we utilize something called the multiple listing service. It's the MLS. That's our database that we use to put all of our homes that we're helping people sell in one spot. And those sites or those MLSs feed those listings to all of the other sites that you all are familiar with. The Zillows, the Realtor.coms, all those different sites, they all get their information in their feed from our MLSs, right? So we're the ones that are feeding that information out there because, again, we're trying to increase exposure and get the most amount of eyeballs on that home possible. When it comes to value and determining what a home is worth, the market is always going to drive or dictate what that home is worth, right? And so a lot of times when people are starting their search or starting to look for homes, They may find that there's some options out there that don't match what they're looking for. They may find that the inventory is usually a little bit lower, or they might find that the houses that they're looking at are in a very competitive area, right? And so it might be a situation where it's like, hey, we keep making offers on homes and we keep losing, and they're seeing if there's anything else out there that can help make the process a little bit easier for them. And that's where off-market sales can typically come into play. Off-market sales, all that means is that it's a home that has not been listed for sale on a site or on the MLS or anything else like that. So it hasn't been necessarily made available to the public to buy. It's something where you went directly to that seller or that homeowner and made an offer on their home that they accepted. Those are the types of deals that I'm referencing when I'm talking about an off-market sale. It's something that wasn't made available for all the market or all the buyers to see or even know that it was available. There's a multitude of ways that these situations can come about. We see it happen a lot of times with families. They might say, hey, we're moving out of this house, and we really want to set our family member up for success. And so we know we would get more for it if we put it on the open market, but we'd rather just sell it directly to them off market, right? That's one example, right? Or it could be a situation where there's not a lot of houses in a particular area that a buyer's searching for, and they might just send out letters to sellers or owners directly and see if anyone's looking to sell. That's another way that an off-market sale can happen. It can happen like what happened with me, where you're on a listing appointment or you're going to view a house and you say, hey, I actually like this house. I want to make an offer on it. And would that seller consider it instead of putting it on the open market? Those are all different scenarios or different ways that it can happen. And so that's just kind of going into the nuts and bolts of like what an off-market sale actually is. It's basically just a fancy way of saying that, hey, we didn't make this available, or the public didn't necessarily know that this home was being sold or that that seller was even interested in selling. That's the way that it works. Now, as far as the advantages and disadvantages, again, no matter what route you take in the real estate world, there are always going to be advantages and disadvantages. There's no way that you can get around it or, if I go in this route, I can avoid all kinds of issues or troubles. No, there's troubles and risk and all kinds of things awaiting you at every turn, no matter what route you take. So just get that out of the way first. I don't want you to think that, if I can get an off-market sale, I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about all that other drama. You can avoid some things, but there's some other problems that may come to the picture as well that you also need to keep in mind. And so let's talk about first just the advantages of buying an off-market sale. One for the buyer. The buyer has the advantage of being able to avoid competing with other buyers in the market. Whether you realize it or not, you as a buyer, anytime you're interested in purchasing a home that's on the market, you're competing with all the other buyers that are out there as well. And so you can avoid the competition and go straight to the house that you want. Another advantage is that you have a little more leeway with the timelines as well, right? And so usually when someone puts in an offer on a house or something like that, they don't know whether or not that deal will work out or whether or not they'll be able to get that house. They may say, hey, we might be making offers on homes for 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe in a couple months before you finally land something, right? You don't know how long that process is going to take. But if you have an off-market sale, you know immediately, okay, if we can make these or come to agreement on these terms, we know at least we've got the house locked down. We're not having to worry about potentially making offers on other properties that may or may not work out in the future, right? And so that's one of the biggest things, is that you can cut through all of the noise and competition and lock in on just the house that you want and avoid all of those other things. There are some situations where you might be able to get even a discount or an advantage on pricing, but I wouldn't count on that. I would just say, like I said, the first two things I referenced are usually your biggest advantages from a buyer perspective. From a seller's perspective, it makes things a lot easier. One, because you don't have to worry about the hassle of prepping the home, staging it, getting it ready for showings, making a ton of improvements to it. Most of the time, the buyer has already seen the place, and so they know its current condition. You're not having to go through and try to make it HD TV ready just to get it on the market, right? So you can usually avoid all of those things. You can avoid having to deal with showings. And if that doesn't sound like a huge advantage, trust me, it is. There are companies out there that have built their entire business model around helping people avoid all of that by offering them less than what their home is actually worth, right? They will often flip the home so that's seller can get out of there quickly, but they'll say, hey, we will help you avoid showings, we'll help you avoid staging and all that stuff if you sell your house at a discount to us so that we can just turn around and flip it. Their entire business model is built around that. And so, again, there are people out there who are willing to leave money on the table if it means they can avoid that whole hassle. That may not be your situation, but that's one advantage that off-market sales have for sellers is they don't have to worry about getting it market ready. They can just sell it directly to that person. They also don't have to worry about how long it may take, right? There are some situations where it might take a week, it could take a month. You just don't know how things may go. Like I said, you might have mistakes with pricing. You could have any number of things that go wrong. But at least with this, you have a more definitive timeline of when that deal can actually close. And then from both sides or both perspectives, one advantage is that timeline is usually a little bit flexible, right? And so from a seller's perspective, you can usually build a little bit more time into the deal if you need to find a place of your own. From a buyer's perspective, right, they can usually give that seller more flexibility as an added advantage for buying their home. But there's a lot of different ways that this can be really beneficial to both sides, whatever, if you do the market or do the sale off market. Now, disadvantages, things that can go wrong. The list can go on, but we'll just reference a couple of them. Some of the disadvantages from both a buyer and seller perspective. But we'll start with the buyer. From the buyer's point of view, I've seen situations where buyers will have usually a little remorse after the fact, after they've gone through the purchase or gone under contract on this off-market sale. They start to realize, oh man, like this means that we won't necessarily get to continue shopping or even start the process of shopping for homes. You know, when you think of House Hunters and HGTV and all those different things, looking or shopping for the house is usually one of the more fun aspects of home buying, right? That's the part that people love to enjoy, kind of walking into different homes, envisioning themselves living there. And when you buy an off-market sale, you really don't get that experience, or at least not the same experience that most other buyers get. You're usually saying, hey, this is just the house that we're going to go with. And so there have been times where people will usually wake up and regret going that direction and say, oh man, I wish I would have had a chance to view some more properties or see if there's something else that might be a better fit for what I'm looking for. Another disadvantage for buyers is that you are usually having to make this more advantageous for the seller. In most cases, not all, but in most cases, you're usually having to make it a bigger advantage for them, which means you will likely be paying a little bit more than what that home may or may not be worth. And so that's one thing that you have to keep in mind as well. When it comes to value, the realtor, the appraiser, none of us, the bank, nobody determines exactly what that home is worth. The market is what dictates a home's actual value. And when you're selling a home off market, it's very difficult for you to tell what that value is because you haven't had a realistic opportunity to see how that home performs on the market. And so that's why it's very difficult for us to tell. Usually it's a little bit better if there's a neighborhood where there have been a lot of sales recently for homes that are very similar to that one. In those cases, it's usually a little bit easier for us to get an idea of what the home's worth is. But if it's in an area where inventory is tight and there haven't been a lot of sales recently, or that house is really unique compared to other houses that are around, it can be very difficult for us to tell because the market hasn't had an opportunity to see what that home is worth. And so in most cases, you're having to make it worth the seller's while, and you're just having to put an offer out there that entices them enough to move. And so it's a very real possibility you may end up overpaying for that house. And you have to understand that as a buyer when you're going in as well. From a seller's perspective, on the flip side of that equation, there can also be situations where a seller is leaving money on the table because they could have gotten more if they put it on the market. Again, the studies show the best way to get the highest price possible for your house is to put it up for sale on the open market. There are some times where people don't want to go through that hassle, don't want to go through that, and that's okay, but they do so knowing they're likely leaving some money on the table. So from a seller's perspective, you may be able to get a little bit more than you could have got, but in some cases you may get less than what you could have got if you put it out there on the market. You could have gotten multiple offers, and you could have gotten someone who gave you all three of those components we talked about, right? If you're selling it off market, you might get a great price, but it might take longer to actually close the deal, and it might be a whole lot of hassle and other things that you have to work through as well. So like I said, you may not get all three of those components that we're usually working towards, but that's the sacrifice that you'll take from a seller's perspective, and that you don't know. But those are kind of the things that you have to keep in mind. One of the other or potentially disadvantages when you're going through this transaction is related to whether or not a realtor or realtors are used in the transaction of the deal. There are some times where people will do an off-market sale because they're trying to avoid having to pay a realtor or pay realtors on both sides of the deal. And so they may say, hey, let's do an off-market sale so we can avoid a listing agent or avoid this buyer's agent and stuff like that too. Obviously, I'm not one that believes that that's the best way to do things, but again, there's been deals that have worked out great like that. There have been other deals that have been completely nightmares, wherever. You just have to figure out what works best for you in that situation. One of the advantages to having a realtor is that we can help, one, make sure that both sides kind of stay separate as far as negotiating everything, but then two, making sure that you are protected at every stage of the process. If you're going in unrepresented, you can make a number of mistakes, right? Not understanding the contracts or the forms, not understanding at what stage of the process you're at risk. There's a lot of things that you may not catch or even know to look for if you don't have representation, right? You could buy that house and then find out after the fact that there's issues with the survey, or there's issues with the foundation, or there's issues with the title that you never caught because you didn't have someone telling you that is the process. And then you may be on the hook or stuck with that house and trying to figure out a way to make things work out even after the fact, right? And so it is highly beneficial to have someone in there to kind of help you. You don't hire a realtor for all the things to go right in the deal. You hire a realtor for all the things that can go wrong, and making sure that as much of that as possible is eliminated in that transaction. And so that's why you always want to have someone in there who can kind of help walk you through the process, who's been through it. The average person is only buying or selling a house maybe a few times in their life. Realtors, we're in this transaction, we're in these deals every single day, right? And so we have the opportunity to see things from all different angles, see what could go wrong, see ways to protect both sides of the transaction and make sure that it works out for everyone who is involved. And those are things that only come with experience from doing it over and over again. Our standard forms and contracts, they literally change every single year. And they change because every year there's a new deal or new issue or problem that rises up that we haven't had or haven't dealt with before, and we're having to tweak or make changes, right? And so if we're in the business every single day and we're still constantly running through things that are changing on an annual basis, how much more could you potentially miss if you went in completely blind with no experience being in this industry on a regular basis? And so it's very important for you to keep that in mind. If you're trying to consider an off-market sale, I would still absolutely find value and find reason for you to have a realtor in that situation representing you. Again, make sure that they're representing you. There are situations too where people will say, hey, we'll just have one realtor work both sides of the deal. In our state, in North Carolina, that's completely legal. It's called dual agency. You can do that. But again, you need to keep in mind that that person can't necessarily give complete loyalty to both sides of the transaction, right? And so if there's only one agent in the deal, both of you or one of you is not getting the full service that you should be getting or that you deserve, right? And so you always need to keep that in mind, is that you want to have your own agent exclusively representing you to make sure that you're in the best position possible to have a successful transaction. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to off-market sales is that you need to make sure that you're doing everything possible to determine what the other party's motivation is. That is one of the most overlooked and underrated aspects of any transaction or any deal. What is the motivation behind that getting them sold? That is going to determine how much of a headache or a nightmare this deal could potentially become. If you as a buyer really want to buy that house, but the seller sort of kind of wants to sell, or, oh, sure, we'll consider it. If you give us a high price, we might go there, but they don't really want to move, that can cause tremendous issues down the road, right? Because then they're not motivated to go out and find something else to move to, or they're not going through the process of kind of moving through steps. And you may say, hey, well, the contract says that you have to be out by this date. If they're not motivated to go through that point, you may end up in a situation where you're having to take them through court and pay legal fees and all these different things and have stuff stretched out for months on end, trying to force something that may not ever even work out in the end, right? And so, again, you need to be looking at everything that's going on, even in those initial communications, right? If they're telling you, hey, we're not seeing anything that's matching what we're looking for on the market, or hey, we're not really sure that we want to sell, but I guess we will. Any of those key notes or clues that can indicate how they're actually feeling or how their motivation is for the deal, you want to keep all of that in mind. That's going to come into play when you're doing repair negotiations, if there's issues with the appraisal or financing. Any of those things can be magnified tenfold if the other party or the other side of the transaction isn't just as motivated to get that deal closed. And so that's one thing that you need to understand. And again, going back to it, I don't hate to beat the drum, but your realtor is going to be a great way to determine what that other party's motivation is. We can pick up on signs and clues a little bit faster because we've been through so many deals and so many situations where we got to see clearly whether or not that person really wanted to go through with the deal. But again, I don't want to knock off-market sales. I have been the beneficiary of an off-market sale, and I don't regret it one bit. It worked out great. We made sure that everyone understood exactly how things worked and what was going on in the deal. You have to understand that both sides are trying to make this thing work out. And so I think it's awesome opportunity if you can find something that works for you. I don't want you to be scared away from it, but I do want you to approach it with the proper amount of caution that you should have in any other type of those transactions. Again, there's never a way for you to completely avoid or get away from all risk or potential problems in a real estate deal, but you can definitely find ways to minimize those risks if you are fully understanding everything about that transaction, all the risk, all the advantages, all the disadvantages before you enter into that deal. So I hope that that's helpful for you guys. I'm always here to talk a little bit more. If you're considering an off-market sale, or if you want to learn more, happy to discuss that with you. But I hope that you all have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you next time.